Today, I put together some of the most brutal shark attacks covered on this channel, resulting in someone being eaten alive. From bull sharks, tiger sharks, and of course, the great white. This video will prove that sharks don't always bite and release when attacking. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. These are the most terrifying shark attack stories you'll ever hear. Welcome to Final Affliction. One of La Jolla's most well-known tourist destinations is La Jolla Cove, a small cove surrounded by high rocky cliffs. It has become an excellent location for scuba diving, swimming, and snorkeling thanks to its wealth of marine life and colder, crystal-clear water. Additionally, the water visibility here can sometimes exceed 30 feet, enticing divers to gather from all corners of Southern California. Large and powerful swells from the open ocean can occasionally come in. At high tides, there is only a tiny patch of dry sand on the beach, but the cove's tide pools are exposed at shallow tides. But amidst the popularity and beauty of the cove lay a dark past. In June 1959, one of the most horrific shark attacks in San Diego, California, occurred in Alligator Head, just a short ways off of La Jolla Cove. It was June 14, 1959. While most people were happy to sleep the day off, Robert Pamprin was awake early on a Sunday. Peeking through his windows, he noticed that the weather was slightly not in his favor. It was a bad day to be in the ocean. However, Robert and his friend Gerard had planned for this day for quite a while. They were planning on hunting for abalone later in the day. Abalones are huge marine gastropod mollusks. The chilly waters of New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Japan, and the west coast of North America are where the huge sea snail is most frequently observed. Abalones are regarded for their exquisite meat and extraordinarily deep flavor, making them a culinary delicacy. It is one of the most expensive types of seafood available, and it can be sold at a high price, either canned, frozen, or live in the shell. Robert and Gerard were hoping to sell some of their catch for a reasonable price, knowing there was a thriving abalone population in the deeper parts of Alligator Head. However, abalones are typically nocturnal animals. They like staying away from lit areas by hiding in the dark during the daytime and feeding at night. This means Robert and Gerard had to go through with the hunting later in the day. To help fill the time in the afternoon, the two friends decided to take their girlfriends to the beach. The plan was while the girls were sunbathing at the shore, Robert and Gerard would leave to hunt at Alligator Head. Robert prepared for the day like any other. He made breakfast and listened to the news, not realizing that today's calm, cloudy day would take a nightmarish turn. Hunting abalone is actually quite taxing to the body, as it requires a lot of movement, so Robert would be free diving later on. He prepared minimal equipment, a pair of blue swim fins, a pink bathing suit, a black mask, black diving gloves, and a yellow-handled abalone iron, a tool used to extract abalone from rocks without harming them. He also brought with him a black inner tube with an attached burlap sack. After Robert and his girlfriend finished preparing everything, they got into their car and made their way to the beach at La Jolla Cove. The sun was still overcast, but every now and again it would peek through the clouds. The outing could have been easily canceled, but there was no stopping Robert and Gerard. Arriving at the beach, Robert parked his car and met with Gerard and his girlfriend. Two shook hands and shared laughs. They talked about the weather and, of course, the hunt later. Meanwhile, their girlfriends caught up with one another. The four headed straight for the beach and spent time like they normally would. They had a front row seat for the beautiful San Diego ocean after all. Who wouldn't want to enjoy a nice, relaxing Sunday like this? Around 5 p.m., Robert and Gerard gathered their equipment from their parked vehicles and headed towards Alligator Head. The weather was still overcast, and the two men could only see through 7 meters of water underneath them. Not exactly an ideal day for hunting abalone. However, it was time to dive into the water. The two men donned their masks, fins, and gloves. They headed straight for the water. The men were experienced swimmers and divers, so they were trained well enough to understand the risks of entering the ocean. Being an engineer for Convair, an aircraft manufacturer, Robert was nobody's fool. However, what probably gave them confidence was the history of the area. There had been no fatal shark attacks in this area before. In the eyes of the public, it was a safe diving spot. However, that would all soon change. The two men took deep breaths and went into the depths. Swimming slowly across the water, they scanned the area for wild abalone hiding in the crevices and surfaces of rocks at the bottom. Spotting a couple of abalones a few meters down, the two men quickly dove deeper. With one hand holding the iron and the other holding the burlap sack, the two carefully scraped the shelled creatures from their attachments. They were careful not to damage the shells, but they had to do things quickly. After all, there was no air tank to save them from drowning. After gathering a few abalones, the men surfaced and took in a breath of fresh air. Fate must have had other plans that day, because for some reason, the two became separated by the waves. Slowly but surely, Robert and Gerard drifted apart until there were 10 to 15 meters between them. Suddenly, a great white shark appeared underneath Robert. Swinging its formidable head back and forth, it was sizing up Robert, thinking it was one of its prey. And then it happened. The shark went in for the kill, and the water exploded into chaos. Opening its massive jaws, the creature was able to devour Robert's entire lower body, forcing him unnaturally higher out of the surface. Robert screamed desperately, "Help me!" Gerard quickly whipped in the direction of his friend. He saw Robert in distress but thought he might be having a cramp. Nevertheless, Gerard rushed to his friend's aid. However, something was not right. Gerard noticed that Robert suddenly disappeared into the waters, leaving behind a crimson mist of blood. Startled and in complete disbelief, Gerard plunged deeper into the water to really see what was happening to Robert. And there it was, in plain and perfect view, a large great white shark completely devouring Robert's lower body. Gerard estimated the creature to be around 7 meters in length. Robert thrashed wildly, trying to free himself from the marauding beast. However, it was to no avail. The shark's power overwhelmed him, and it quickly took him to deep waters. Gerard took a deep breath and quickly rushed towards the commotion, waving his hands frantically at the shark in an attempt to scare it away. However, it was to no avail. The shark's jaws were clamped shut on Robert's lower body, his legs inside the creature's jaws. Suddenly, the massive shark began swinging its head from side to side, trying to tear Robert in half. Realizing he wasn't doing anything to the creature, Gerard swam back to the shore, alerting the lifeguards, who then alerted the local authorities of the attack. Immediately after Robert's attack, 10 experienced scuba divers dove into the area, searching for Robert. However, after combing the waters for 2 hours, they ended up with nothing, not even Robert's clothing or gear. However, a few days later, a swim fin marked with rows of shark teeth washed ashore on the La Jolla beach. Upon inspection, authorities discovered the written initials of Robert. In the subsequent investigations, people were skeptical of Gerard. However, his statement was supported by William Abbott, who was atop a rock formation when the attack happened. His testimony was congruent with Gerard's. However, people were still skeptical that it was a great white shark that attacked Robert. They wanted to believe it was a killer whale, but Gerard was sure he saw a great white. Investigations revealed 4 crucial events happening beforehand that may have contributed to Robert's gruesome fate. Firstly, divers were spearing yellowtail less than 2 hours before the attack. Sharks are reported to be attracted to speared fish and the low-frequency vibrations of the commotion. Secondly, hours before the attack, a U.S. Navy sailor had badly lacerated himself in the adjacent rocks. Consequently, he lost a lot of blood while he was in the water, further attracting the shark into the area. Thirdly, approximately 600 meters to the west of the cove were a group of harbor seals perched by the rocks. The fourth reason is probably the most contributory to the attack. The night before the attack, a dead whale washed 800 meters ashore to the north of where Robert was attacked. The whale's bodily fluids might have been too widely disseminated by surface currents and winds. This may have drawn unwanted attention from the shark, ultimately causing the gruesome fate of Robert. In November of 1960, more than a year after Robert's attack, geologists were able to recover the skeleton of a man at the bottom of Submarine Canyon, 650 yards off of La Jolla. The coroner examined the skeleton and concluded it fits Robert's description. It was undoubtedly a tragedy what happened to Robert. We can all agree, whether you're an experienced diver or swimmer, things outside of your control can directly influence your time in the ocean. You should always keep in mind that when you enter the water, you're entering the beast's territory. You're at their mercy, and growing up to 7 meters in length, it could easily swallow you whole. Even in the waters with no previous shark fatalities, without taking the proper precautions, you could easily end up as the first shark attack victim to meet their unfortunate final affliction. This Wednesday marked the third day of their vacation in the Bahamas. Like many tourists, they had always dreamed of visiting the island country. Unlike most places in the world, the Bahamas wasn't falsely represented by the media and movies. It was, if not more, as stunning and exciting as they said. Jordan and her family woke up to the sunrise, eager to start the day. After all, this was only their third day and they had so many things to do. Jordan had breakfast with her family and shared stories with them as they sat together at the table. It was a fun time surrounded by the beautiful sandy beaches in the Bahamas and accompanied by her family and her girlfriend. What more could a 21-year-old girl from Torrance, California ask for? Back home, Jordan was studying communications at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Her girlfriend Gianna was also studying communications. At around 12 p.m., the family had just finished their activities and were about to end the day relaxing and enjoying the scenery. However, that would soon change. Spotting the Sandy Toes Tour Company, the family decided to take a last-minute day trip to Rose Island. The 6-hour excursion involved a boat cruise, a snorkeling experience, and a private beach where you could pet swimming pigs. Jordan was ecstatic about the idea. She had always been an admirer of nature and deeply loved animals. Snorkeling and petting pigs in the Bahamas was music to her ears. Although the trip was already full for the day, Michael, Jordan's father, managed to convince the company to have them on board for the excursion. The company snuck them on. Excited at the deal, the family headed towards Paradise Island Ferry Terminal, ready to board the ferry that would take them to Rose Island. It was a tragic mistake. As the energetic family boarded the ferry, they beamed their smiles at each other, unaware of what was about to happen. Nobody could have predicted that this small day trip would change their lives forever. The small ferry was docked, floating atop the rich turquoise waters beneath it. Although it was in the middle of summer, the sun decided to hide effectively today behind the gray clouds looming over the ocean. Still, the waters were just as beautiful with the dimmer sunshine it was working with. Eventually, the family followed the guide to prepare for their snorkeling excursion. However, Michael, the two brothers, Jordan's sister, and Gianna did not want to go through with the snorkeling. They just wanted to spend the rest of the afternoon lightly swimming by the beachside, enjoying the scenic views of the ocean. Jordan and Cammie, on the other hand, wanted the full experience. It was the third day of their trip, after all, and Jordan wanted to make the most of it. The family talked it over and decided they would just part for a while. Later, Jordan and Cammie would rendezvous with Michael and the rest by the beachside. Since the distance to the other side where the snorkeling spot was not so far, separating from one another seemed like a good idea at the time. However, it was a decision that everyone would later regret. As the two groups parted ways, Michael kissed Jordan on the forehead and told her, "I'll see you later, Jordan." Jordan waved her hand as she walked with Cammie towards the other part of the beach. The rest of the members left by the beachside waved her goodbye. Unbeknownst to them, this would be the last time they would see Jordan alive. Jordan and Cammie walked up to the guide and followed the trail. The snorkeling spot was not too far, but walking towards it was a great time for reflection. Along the way, there were green vegetation and exotic birds such as peacocks in the area. The trail was sparsely placed with benches, locker rooms, and bathrooms for the tourists. The narrow trail was surrounded by all kinds of trees growing through the sandy soil. Cammie and Jordan spoke about life, her school, and her family as they calmly walked alongside the other tourists. The bright 21-year-old had many aspirations and a great future ahead of her. Eventually, they reached the snorkeling spot. Donning their wetsuits, Jordan and Cammie prepared for the fun experience. Jordan was particularly excited to see the underwater critters meandering around in the area. It was time to go. Jordan headed towards the deeper parts of the water, admiring nature through her goggles. It was great timing as the sunlight began to show itself again, illuminating the beautiful structures of coral reefs under the water. Cammie had also gotten in the water and was thoroughly enjoying her underwater exploration. However, as the two enjoyed their experience, death reared its ugly head. As Jordan continued looking through the water, Cammie broke through the surface. Suddenly, she heard Jordan yell, "Mom!" She turned her head and saw something strange. At first, She thought it was a school of dolphins surrounding Jordan, and that Jordan wanted to show it to her. However, as she looked more intently, an ominous feeling enveloped her. It was a feeling no mother ever wanted to feel. A school of sharks had approached Jordan out of nowhere. Immediately, Cammie's motherly instincts kicked in. She shouted at Jordan from a distance, telling her to swim towards her. However, it was futile. Without warning, the school of sharks pounced on her, biting her everywhere. Jordan fought hard, but there was already blood in the water, and the sharks had become frenzied. Jordan let loose blood-curdling screams, prompting Cammie to approach her. She screamed at Jordan once more, asking her to swim towards her. However, Jordan could not swim anymore. Cammie noticed her right arm had been bitten off by the shark. Horrified at the sight, Cammie immediately sprang into action, swimming towards Jordan despite the risk of getting attacked herself. Naturally, she was fearful of swimming into the chaos, but she didn't care. The fear of losing her child overtook any instinct to run and call for help. It was simply something any loving mother would have done. Cammie reached Jordan and fought off the sharks, punching the beasts in the nose and hitting them with everything she had. As she pulled on Jordan, the young girl told Cammie, "Mom, there's another shark coming." The shark sped towards them like a freight train. It bit off another chunk of her lower leg. Jordan was bleeding profusely. Cammie never gave up. She hauled Jordan toward a nearby rock and called for help. Eventually, a boat from the Sandy Toes snorkeling tour rushed to her aid. Michael and the other family members were petting pigs by the beachside when they heard of a teenager attacked by sharks in the snorkeling area. After waiting a few minutes, Jordan was taken by an ambulance to a hospital in Nassau. However, upon arrival, she was pronounced dead. When Michael and the rest arrived at the hospital, they were too late. Jordan had succumbed to her injuries. In the subsequent months following her death, the family criticized the company for not having any protocols when it came to shark attacks. When the incident happened, not one staff or a boat was present to whisk away the sharks. Additionally, when Jordan was bleeding on a nearby island, barely clinging to life, the boat that would take her to the hospital arrived with no medical supplies. According to Michael, they did not even have first aid. The Lindsays called for better responses in the future to avoid the terrible fate their daughter experienced. Sadly, according to Michael, in his most recent interviews, Cammie is still too traumatized from the incident, especially because she was present and she witnessed firsthand her daughter resting in her arms while slowly succumbing to her final affliction. It was Wednesday, January 17, 1837. A young boy, patriotically named Alfred Australia Howe, was visiting a beach on Australia's east coast. The beach was at Trial Bay, where the Macleay River runs into the sea. Situated roughly midway between Brisbane and Sydney, the bay is a popular tourist destination today. Its turquoise sheltered waters offer excellent swimming and gentle swells for beginner surfers. The mouth of the river is a popular fishing spot, and the local history also adds to the appeal of this location. As dusk was setting in, the 12-year-old Alfred walked down to the sandy beach in the bay. He was accompanied by his servant. This man's job was to accompany the family on their outdoor trips and act as a bodyguard should the occasion arise. Alfred had already lost his father in a tragic accident 8 years before. This incident had also involved the Australian waters. When Alfred was only 4 years old, he and his father had been on a boat in Sydney Harbor. For unknown reasons, the boat capsized when the pair were trying to board another vessel. Alfred's father, George Howe, had swum after Alfred and managed to push him towards the safety of a nearby craft. Although he heroically saved his son, George Howe, owner of the Sydney Gazette newspaper, sadly drowned that day. He left behind his wife and their 3 children, including the young Alfred. Despite this family tragedy, Alfred was not dissuaded from the water. Living so close to the coast, his childhood was full of seaside visits and splashing in the warm waters off the Australian coast. On this particular day, he had walked along the beach, talking to the family's servant. He had played in the sand when they came to where the Macleay River ran into the sea. The flow of the river churned up the sandy, muddy bottom, giving the water a slight murkiness. Alfred paddled into the fresh current to wash the sand from his feet. Unknown to him, he was being watched by an underwater predator. The water gently ran over his toes in the ankle-deep river. He splashed and shook his feet slightly. Alfred looked down at them, watching as the sand was washed away. Then suddenly something burst out of the water. In an instant, a large shark grabbed Alfred by the legs. It thrashed its head from side to side as it pulled Alfred's feet from under him. He fell backwards, yelling out in alarm. The shark dragged the boy into the river and out towards the open ocean. Alfred could barely breathe as he tried to hold his head up above the water. The speed of the shark was incredible. The power of its jaws was immense. Alfred tried desperately to free his legs from the shark's almighty grip, but it was too powerful. Luckily, Alfred's servant, whose name was not provided by the newspaper, leapt into action. With no thought for his own safety, he jumped into the river. He ran through the shallows, shouting at Alfred, chasing after the shark. Just as the shark made it to the sea with Alfred in its grip, the servant dived for the small boy. He managed to grab hold of Alfred's hands. He pulled and pulled. He was determined not to let go. The boy was screaming, the shark was thrashing around, but mercifully, as the shark readjusted its grip on the boy, it momentarily released him. That was all that was needed. The servant managed to pull Alfred away. As he tugged the youngster, they fell backwards into the river, only feet from the sandy beach. Onlookers had run towards the commotion. Some of them began screaming at the two in the water. To their horror, the shark had done a U-turn in the sea and was now torpedoing back towards them. It began chasing them up the river. The servant picked up Alfred and ran to the shore. He escaped the water just in time. When he lay Alfred on the sand, the boy was still conscious, but he was bleeding heavily. The people on the beach who had witnessed the terrifying attack and the heroic save by the servant quickly rushed to his aid. They grabbed clothing and made makeshift tourniquets. They tied them tightly around Alfred's legs to stem the bleeding. According to witnesses, this had the desired effect and the blood flow from Alfred's gaping wounds was greatly reduced. He had lost a large chunk of flesh from the calf in one of his legs. Alfred began drifting in and out of consciousness as he was rushed to the hospital. It is not known what condition he was in when he arrived at the hospital. After being stitched up and assessed, the surgeon ordered him to be transferred to a hospital in the coastal town of Port Macquarie, south of Trial Bay. There he was prepared for the amputation of one of his legs. Sadly, just 3 days after the attack, Alfred died from tetanus before they could operate. The Clostridium tetani bacteria responsible for causing tetanus had spread throughout Alfred's body. His nervous system was attacked and had shut down. Even today, there is no known cure, but symptoms are managed and people are vaccinated. Alfred Howe may have survived his injuries if modern-day medicine had been available. Today, shark attack victims are typically given a tetanus shot when they arrive at the hospital. If victims survive the initial shark attack, the aftercare is vital to ensure their survival. This includes treating the victim with antibiotics to keep infections at bay. The marine environment harbors many dangerous bacteria, as does a shark's mouth. Vibrio bacteria from a shark's mouth enter a person's bloodstream during an attack. If left untreated for 24 hours, fatality rates caused by Vibrio infection jump up to 30%. If left untreated for 72 hours, fatality jumps to 100%. Luckily, today's medical advances have increased the chances of survival in animal attacks. Sadly, Alfred Howe wasn't so lucky. It would be more than 120 years before the next recorded shark attack in Trial Bay. This time in 1961, the shark attack was provoked. Two spearfishermen, John Davy and John Pierpoint, injured a 1.4-meter wobbegong shark, which then spun around and bit the men on the legs and ankles. The attack didn't prove fatal. Another provoked attack that was reported a few years later in 1966 also occurred in Trial Bay. It happened when Stephen Lusted speared a gray nurse shark while spearfishing in deep water. The shark bit him in self-defense, but Stephen's companions fought it off and he survived the attack. The shark was killed by his friends. The attack on Alfred was unprovoked, but it could have been prevented. Since the 1800s, there has been a huge amount of education around sharks. More recently, they have been shown to be important animals in the ocean's ecosystems and are to be respected. The shark that attacked Stephen was likely hunting at the time, particularly given that the day was drawing to a close and dusk was setting in. Alfred seemed unaware of the dangers of entering the shallow waters at dusk and had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 2022, there were 12 unprovoked shark attacks in Australia's waters. 3 of these proved fatal. Knowing the dangers and understanding the behavior of sharks can go a long way to avoid being bitten. The Howe family had suffered terribly that decade. After losing her husband, Miss Howe now lost her young son and was left with 2 daughters to raise alone. Since then, there has been massive development in shark safety technology, but whenever we enter the water in shark territory, we must always be aware that we might meet our final affliction. On June 4, 2005, Henry and his best friend Pete Van Nykirk decided to go on a skin diving and spearfishing trip. That day, Pete Van remembers distinctly what Henry said to him before their excursion. Henry said that day he wouldn't mind being attacked by a shark because Miller's Point is notorious for shark attacks. Henry might have predicted his tragic fate. 7 months ago, a 77-year-old woman was taken by a great white shark off Jagger Walk at Fish Hoek. She was devoured and all that remained was her red swimming cap. Since 2002, there have been 7 shark attacks in Western Cape. The waters of Miller's Point connect seamlessly with False Bay's large open waters, a hotspot for great white sharks. In fact, there are so many great white sharks here that False Bay is one of the few places on the planet where divers can reliably encounter the creatures up close, with the protection of cages, of course. According to experts, great white shark attacks are rare. However, because these predators are enormous, fast, and powerful, they are often fatal when the attacks do occur. Studies showed that attacks on humans are often the result of mistaken identity. By looking at humans and animals from a great white shark's point of view underwater, researchers concluded that these creatures, although highly evolved, have poor color perception. However, they are keen on motion and brightness contrast, frequently mistaking humans on the surface as seals. On that fateful day, Henry wore a red wetsuit, contrasting strongly with the surrounding waters. June 4th, 2005, was a day like any other. Most attacks are. The gentle ocean breeze blowing from the south was always inviting for surfers, divers, and swimmers alike. It was especially enticing on a warm and sunny Saturday like this one. Henry Murray was a 22-year-old student from Durbanville, a quaint semi-rural town in the Western Cape province of South Africa. Placed on the northeast outskirts of the metropolis, the town is surrounded by wine and wheat farms. However, Henry was not interested in them. He decided to pursue medicine, attending his 5th year at the University of Stellenbosch, a medical school in Cape Town. Henry had always been an outdoor enthusiast. He had a strong affinity for nature and wanted to experience everything firsthand. He was also a sportsman who never had problems with taking on challenges. After his spearfishing excursion, Henry actually had plans to travel to KwaZulu-Natal. However, that plan was about to be derailed in the most unfortunate circumstances. Henry, accompanied by his best friend and fellow medical student Pete, headed to Black Marlin Restaurant to grab some lunch. The restaurant provided a scenic view of the ocean, so the two hung around there for an hour or so. After finishing their lunch, the two rested and eventually decided to enter the waters at around 2 p.m. in front of the restaurant. With the seas at a low spring tide, Henry and Pete decided to swim towards the deeper parts, approximately 150 meters away from the shore. The ocean was relatively calm, with its half-meter swells every now and again. Additionally, due to the sunny weather, the water had good visibility. It was a good day to enter shark-infested waters. After an hour or so, Henry decided to hunt and spear galleon. Henry took a deep breath and dove toward the bottom of the ocean, spotting a galleon. Henry aimed his fishing spear and fired at the unwitting fish. However, he had no time to celebrate his catch. From the corner of his eye, something was moving in the distance. It was a large silhouette slowly moving toward him. Henry paused and looked at the creature. Then his heart sank. He realized they needed to get out of the water. Quickly heading back to the surface, Henry shouted to Pete, "A great white is here, we have to get out." There was no problem spotting the shark. After all, the water visibility was excellent. However, as Henry would soon discover, spotting the danger wasn't enough to save his life. Pete heard Henry's warning and promptly moved towards the shore. As the two hurriedly swam together to escape the danger, a great white shark suddenly came out of the water next to them, utterly surprising the two frantic men. The water burst into chaos as the creature propelled itself in the air trying to intercept them. The marauding predator was drawn entirely to Henry and Pete's movements. It was hunting them. After making a grand entrance, however, the shark decided to disappear under the water again. And that's when it all began. Sharks can swim approximately 50 miles per hour. At their athletic peak, humans can swim around 6 miles per hour. Henry knew the shark was circling him. Suddenly, the creature reappeared. Showing its fin on the surface, it snapped its menacing jaws at Henry. Henry was never one to back down from a fight. With the spear gun in hand, he was able to fend off the attack. The shark swam away, but it provided little relief to Henry as the creature immediately circled back and turned to him again. Whatever Henry's attempt was, it did not deter the creature. Again, Henry fought using his spear to keep the predator at a reasonable distance. The shark's jaws barely missed him and Henry was unscathed. Usually, sharks don't try to eat humans. However, this particular shark was adamant about taking a bite out of Henry. Instead of snapping at Henry for the third time, the shark swam underneath him and dragged him to the depths. Mind you, this all happened within a minute, so Pete had no time to react. Finally realizing his friend was in deep trouble, Pete dove towards the commotion. However, what he saw would scar him for life. It was Henry's arms dangling from the shark's mouth. The creature had clamped onto Henry's entire body. Seeing the sight of his best friend being attacked, Pete felt an insane rush of anger and fear. He quickly pointed his spear gun at the hostile creature and fired, but it had no effect. The shark had tasted Henry's blood and was in a frenzy. Within seconds of getting shot, the creature swam away with Henry still in its mouth. Panicked and traumatized, Pete swam to the shore and called for help. Immediately after Pete's desperate calls for help, some local fishermen came to his assistance. They used their boats to search for Henry and called emergency services. Within 20 minutes, Simonstown Police and Fire Services, Metro Rescue, National Sea Rescue Institute, and other emergency agencies arrived in the area. They conducted a search, but never found Henry or his body. Divers were only able to recover Henry's spear gun, and the rubber swim fin settled a meter below the water's surface. However, the following day, fishermen in Simonstown saw the shark that attacked Henry. They figured it was the creature because it had a spear still embedded in its body. On that same day, a piece of Henry's wetsuit with his car keys were found 7 kilometers from where the attack took place. There was no way that Henry could have survived the attack. At this point, the rescuers assumed he was already gone. They promptly informed Henry's family and Pete. The search for his body continued only until 3:30 p.m. on that Sunday afternoon. Eventually, they had to accept the truth and call the search off. In the following weeks, Pete spoke to the media and remembered Henry's prediction of being attacked by a shark. Pete says, "I think he knew his time was near. I believe God took him away." When the attack happened, Pete remembered feeling helpless, even though he could hear Henry's screams from afar. It just happened too quickly, he simply could not react. Although shark attacks are rare, swimming in the world's most dense location of great white sharks increases your odds of being attacked by multiples. In the case of Henry, it seems he knew this deep down, and unfortunately, met his terrifying final affliction. It was September 1st, 2001. The United States was in the grip of fear after hundreds of shark-related deaths over the course of just a few months had made everyone uneasy about visiting beaches or surfing in the water. Species like the bull shark had become notorious for their danger to humans. These sharks can grow up to 9 feet and are considered one of the most aggressive species of all. With jaws that can gape open up to 20 inches, revealing heavily serrated teeth, these sharks are even known to be cannibalistic, eating their own kind as well as other species. The summer of the shark, as those few months later became known, now seemed to be coming to an end. But the victims of these shark attacks left terrifying tales in their wake, including the tragic demise of a 10-year-old boy who had been mercilessly mauled to death in July by a bull shark in the shallow waters of a Florida beach. For 10-year-old David Peltier and his 2 brothers, Robert and Josh, Summer vacations were ending and the next school term was about to start in just a few days. The three young boys missed the long and warm summer days and wanted to visit the beach one last time before the fall set in. The boys' father, Richard Peltier, decided that the Sandbridge Beach, about 5 miles south of Virginia Beach, was the perfect place to spend a relaxing Saturday afternoon. It was a popular vacation spot with shallow waters and warm sand, and they had generally enjoyed their time at the beach earlier that year. The boys loved the beach, and the shallow water meant that it was safe to tread a few feet closer to the shore and feel the wet sand beneath their feet. The ocean seemed calm and clear, and young David would often stop to admire the small dogfish that would swim up close to the shore. After relaxing and some light surfing, a few hours had passed. Richard had surfed enough and decided to remove the tether to his longboard and attach it to David's surfboard. At this point, they had gone more than 50 yards into the water, but it was still just 4 feet deep. Richard's other two sons were just 10 feet away, and the sea looked calm with the occasional light waves. It was a safe environment to teach the young boys how to surf and balance in the water by themselves. Or so he thought. Richard sent off his son David just a few feet further into the water, and that's when he felt some commotion beneath the water. He looked down and he saw what sent shivers of terror down his spine. In the flowing water below, he could make out the figure of a shark about 8 feet long. Then, as it swam closer to the surface, he saw the dreaded fin. The horrifying sight, combined with the fact that his children were still several feet away from his reach, was enough to turn the warm summer afternoon into a living nightmare. Immediately, he screamed at the top of his lungs for his boys to get back on their surfboards and frantically made his way to 10-year-old David to try and drag him back to safety. But then, as he held David's arm, he felt a strong tug from the other side. The boy let out a scream in agony as the shark bit into his thigh, trying to pull him deep into the water to be devoured. Richard realized he was now locked in a cynical tug-of-war against a sea monster, and between them was his own son. The shark refused to let go and began shaking its head left and right to try and chew off a bite of the little boy. Richard, his wet grip slipping off of his son's arm, did everything he could to save his son, even at the cost of his own life. He put his right hand between the shark's jaws and tried to loosen its grip. The animal then bit down with greater force and managed to tear off the child's entire leg. Richard hit the shark as hard as he could on its head and even punched its eyes to try and throw it off. Momentarily pacified, the shark swam back to the ocean with David's limb. Richard gathered his senses and realized that his son was bleeding profusely. He picked him up and tried to swim back 50 yards to the shore as fast as he could. With an ever-present danger of the shark returning, those 50 yards felt like 50 miles as he carried his son on his shoulders back to safety. The beachgoers had realized that something had gone terribly wrong, and the rescuers had reached the scene by the time they made it back to sand. Richard finally made it to solid ground and spotted his other two sons crying and screaming for their brother, who was unconscious and losing blood fast. Every passing second now was heavy on little David's life. He was slipping away, held in his father's hands. Richard, crying and pleading for help, tried to revive his son. The shark, with its gaping 17-inch jaw opening, had torn into one of the biggest arteries in his thigh, and no lifeguards at the scene were able to stop the rapid bleeding. An ambulance had arrived at the scene by this time, and Richard hurried him in to save his life. The father had now realized the gravity of the event, and for the first time thought that he might actually be witnessing the death of his beloved son before his very eyes. David was rushed into one hospital after another. The bleeding had been controlled, but the amount that he had already lost put him in dire straits. The following was a long night for Richard. He sat beside his son at the hospital bed at the Children's Hospital of King's Daughters, pleading to God to save his son's life. At 4 a.m. the next morning, David's life finally slipped away, and he died from the massive amount of blood lost from his missing leg. The tragic incident sent shockwaves throughout America and revived fears about shark attacks. The beach was closed briefly the next day, but reopened after helicopter surveillance declared the area free of sharks. But nothing could bring back the life of 10-year-old David, who in his last moments awake witnessed the pure terror of being torn to pieces by an aquatic beast. Professionals thought that the shark was a sandbar species native to the Atlantic Ocean, but a report a month later claimed that it was a bull shark, identified by its fin and its proclivity to swim in shallower waters. The species is known to be highly aggressive and for tearing away the flesh from its prey with violent movements of the head. The tragedy haunted Richard for many years afterwards, and the memory of his son moves him to tears whenever he thinks of the events of that fateful day. It's always important to understand the risks involved while entering the domain of these super predators. To them, it's just lunch, but for many people each year, it's the day they meet their final affliction. Wednesday, October 27th, 1937. Storm clouds were gathering above the sea in Gold Coast, Australia. The water was warm and choppy. The light was gloomy with the sun barely breaking through the clouds. After work, a group of 6 friends headed to the pristine golden sands of Kira Beach. They entered the water just after 5 p.m. that evening. There were some good breakers about 90 yards out between the shore and a sand spit. Whilst the rest of the group headed in after a quick swim and splash about, Norman Gervin, Gordon Doniger, and Jack Brinkley remained in the surf. They had their bodyboards with them and they were waiting for the perfect wave to ride back in. It never came. Instead, Norman felt a sudden tug on his leg. He cried out in horror as he realized a shark was attacking him. Waving his arms above his head, desperately trying to capture the attention of his friends, the shark tore through his skin. Gordon thought Norman was messing around and told him to ride the next wave in. As the next wave began to peak, Gordon noticed a sea of red surrounding his screaming friend. He dashed over to him. Gordon grabbed Norman's arm, but realizing it was barely hanging on, he repositioned himself behind Norman, trying to support him in the water whilst kicking out at the shark. He shouted to their friend Jack, who was swimming 10 yards away, and Jack rushed over. As Gordon tried desperately to pull Norman towards the shore, Jack stopped dead in the water. He began kicking and thrashing around. In a frenzy, the shark had turned on him. Jack punched and slapped the water, shouting out in fear. Panic gripped Gordon as he clung onto his friend, watching in horror as Jack was now attacked. Moments later, the shark was back for Norman. Gordon felt a sharp tug as it grabbed Norman's leg once more and began to shake him vigorously. Gordon held on as tightly as he could. His hand was slashed by the shark, and in that instant, he momentarily loosened his grip. Norman somberly looked Gordon in his eye and spoke his last haunting words. "I'm gone," he said. "Goodbye." And with that, Norman slipped through Gordon's fingers and was gone. Still 70 yards from the shore, Gordon and Jack made a mad swim for it. Frantically, they raced through the water, heads down. With every muscle fiber pumping their arms and legs as fast as they could go, adrenaline was coursing through their bodies. In a moment of terror, Gordon glanced to his side and saw the shark coming right at him. Miraculously, he managed to reach out and push it away. He pushed off from it as it slipped beneath him, and he felt a surge as a wave from behind him torpedoed him to shore. But the shark wasn't finished. Missing Gordon, it glided through the surf and made a beeline for Jack. As it launched itself at Jack, he cried out, and from the beach, Gordon's brother Joe leapt into the water. He ducked and dived under the waves, each time bobbing back up to see his friend splashing, coughing, and sputtering. The rough waters slapped him in the face mercilessly as he tried again and again to reach Jack. He could see the shark's fin as it circled its prey. After what seemed like an eternity, Joe finally grabbed hold of Jack. "If I hadn't tried to save him, it wouldn't have got me," said Jack. Supporting him around his chest, Joe swam powerfully back towards the shore. He momentarily looked back and saw the shark emerge from the water, its razor-sharp serrated teeth only inches from his face. The rest of its body submerged as an eerie shadow just below the surface. Joe estimated it to be about 8 feet long. It clamped down on Jack's left arm, twisting and pulling. Joe refused to let go. Jack groaned in agony. Blood poured from his gaping wound as the shark finally let go. He passed out from the trauma, and Joe felt the heavy, dead weight of his friend. His legs burned and his lungs felt as if though they were on fire as he heroically hauled his friend through the choppy surf. The beach was tantalizingly close. He could see the crowd of people now gathered on the sand, urging him to hurry as he inched ever closer to the shore. He glanced back over his shoulder. The splashing waves made it difficult to spot an approaching shark. Every second that passed, Joe anticipated the return of the shark from the murky depths. Eventually, Joe made it back to the safety of the shore. He dragged his friend onto dry land, gasping for air. The rest of the group gathered around and rapidly made a tourniquet around Jack's severed arm. The emergency services arrived shortly after and rushed Jack off to the hospital. He remained conscious throughout the entire ordeal. Miraculously, Joe had initially saved Jack's life, but tragedy struck once more. Surgeons were unable to save his arm, and he died in the hospital the next day. It was a devastating loss of 2 young men. Once Joe and Jack had made it to shore, one of the group, Alf Kilburn, jumped onto a jet ski to search for Norman. He skimmed over the ocean surface and then, just beyond the breakers, he stopped in his tracks. He saw a large pool of blood-stained water, and there, circling it, was a huge tiger shark. Alf returned to the beach. Tiger sharks can grow to a massive 20 feet long. There have even been sightings of 25-foot tiger sharks. They are distinctive by their dark, tiger-like stripes on their skin. They frequent coastal waters and coral reefs. For this reason, they are more likely to come in contact with people. Although tiger shark attacks on humans are rare, they are the second most common after great white sharks. The next day, some of Norman's remains washed ashore. Lifesavers and local experts headed out in a motorboat and managed to catch a large female tiger shark. She measured 11.5 foot long, had a girth of 6 feet, and weighed 850 pounds. When the shark was cut open, there were distinct human remains inside, including Norman's hand, which was distinguishable by a unique scar he had. There are over 20 shark attacks in Australian waters every year. Of these attacks, 2 to 3 are fatal. Today, some of Australia's coastlines are protected by shark nets and drumlines. It is easy to fear these apex predators and turn to drastic measures such as culling them in hope of protecting people. But sharks are essential to the marine environment. As apex predators, they maintain the balance within the food chain. When shark populations are threatened, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and commercial fisheries all decline. Each of these habitats is vital to a whole host of other species, not least the survival of human beings. Tiger sharks are formidable predators. Like most sharks, they have specialized adaptations to enable them to hunt proficiently. They can detect electrical signals produced by their prey and can see in murky water and low light. There is very little that tiger sharks won't eat, but their main prey consists of fish and mollusks to sea turtles, dolphins, and sea lions. But as we've seen in today's story, they sometimes eat humans. And if you ever find yourself unknowingly swimming with them, you could very easily meet your unexpected, final affliction.